Imagine, if you will, pulling out your smartphone right now to send a text message.
Yeah, something we literally all do 100 times a day.
Exactly. You type it out, but instead of just pressing send and, watching that satisfying little swoosh animation, you have to hand your phone to a courier,
Oh, boy.
right? And that courier has to physically run 100 miles across rocky terrain, like through storms, over mountains, just to deliver your message.
It sounds completely absurd.
It really does. But for the vast majority of human history, the speed of information was, well, it was inextricably biologically linked to the speed of travel.
Right, you can only communicate as fast as a horse could gallop or, a ship could sail.
Or a person could run. We
Yeah.
just take instant light-speed communication completely for granted today.
We really do.
I mean, we think of the modern digital world as something that was just cooked up a few decades ago in some sterile Silicon Valley garage.
Yeah, a bunch of guys in hoodies writing code.
Exactly. But the truth is much stranger. The architecture of our entire digital reality wasn't invented by software engineers in the 21st century.
Not at all.
It was forged in the 19th century with heavy copper wires, clicking magnets, and, the smell of ozone.
It's this profound historical blind spot we all seem to share. I mean, we look at our sleek laptops and our blinking fiber optic routers, and we completely fail to see the ghosts of the Victorian era humming inside them.
That is such a great way to put it. We think of the internet as this modern invention, but its architecture was forged in that era of steam and steel.
Absolutely.
So today, we are taking a deep dive into the telegraphic revolution. We want to see how humanity managed to execute this massive conceptual leap.
And in the process, accidentally invented the digital age.
Yes. We are going to explore the exact moment humanity decoupled the message from the physical medium. Turning human thought into abstract electrical pulses.
To really grasp the magnitude of this shift, you have to put yourself in the mindset of the early 1800s.
Okay, set the scene for us.
Well, for thousands of years, a message was always a tangible thing, like it was ink on papyrus or a heavy clay tablet.
Right, or a sealed letter carried across the Mongol Yam network.
Exactly. It had mass. It had weight. You could hold it.
So to separate the meaning of words from a physical object, that requires a massive paradigm shift.
A total shift in our understanding of the natural world, which actually brings us to a Danish physicist named Hans Christian Ørsted in 1820.
Okay, let's talk about Ørsted.
Yeah.
Because before him, science treated electricity and magnetism as entirely separate phenomena.
Yeah, almost like different elements entirely.
You had static electricity, which you could generate by rubbing amber or glass, right?
And then you had lodestones, natural magnets that always pointed north. They were considered totally unrelated curiosities.
Just two completely different chapters in the physics textbooks of the day.
But Ørsted was conducting a lecture demonstration. It was a fairly routine experiment involving a voltaic pile.
Which is just an early battery, right?
Yeah, an early battery and a wire. And by sheer coincidence, there was a magnetic compass sitting on the bench near the wire.
I love that it was just a coincidence.
It really was. When Ørsted connected the circuit and ran an electric current through that wire, he noticed something out of the corner of his eye.
The compass needle.
Yes. The nearby magnetic compass needle deflected.
It just twitched.
Just a tiny twitch. But that tiny twitch fundamentally altered the trajectory of human civilization.
Wow. Because it proved they were connected.
Exactly. It proved that electricity and magnetism were two sides of the same coin. Electromagnetism. But more importantly for our deep dive, it proved that electricity could exert a physical force at a distance.
Oh, I see. If you can control the flow of current here, you can control a physical magnet over there.
Yeah.
That is the conceptual foundation of the telegraph right there.
Yeah.
The ability to push a button on one side of a room and make something physically move on the other side.
Or theoretically on the other side of a continent.
Right. But knowing something is theoretically possible in a physics lab and actually building a reliable, globe-spanning communication network, those are two completely different things.
Entirely different. The translation from lab curiosity to world-changing infrastructure required a very specific kind of thinker.
And strangely enough, the person who made the most vital leap wasn't a trained engineer or a physicist.
No, he wasn't.
He was an American portrait painter named Samuel Finley Breeze Morse.
Yeah, a painter.
Yeah.
And the real breakthrough actually happened on a packet ship called the Sully, sailing across the Atlantic in 1832.
I always find this detail so fascinating. We have an artist tackling one of the greatest engineering challenges of the century.
It might actually be exactly why he succeeded.
Really? How so?
Well, think about it. An engineer looks at a problem and tries to build a machine that replicates an existing process.
Like trying to automate what a human already does.
Exactly. And we see this with early British attempts at the telegraph. Sir Charles Wheatstone and Sir William Fothergill Cooke patented a system in Britain in 1837. But they were approaching it with a very literal analog mindset.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second because I want to look at their system.
Mhm.
It really highlights just how brilliant Morse was by comparison.
Absolutely.
Wheatstone and Cooke built what was called a 5-needle dial telegraph.
Just picture a large diamond-shaped board, and it has 5 separate magnetic needles mounted on the face.
Right. And to send a single letter of the alphabet, the operator had to send electrical current down multiple separate wires simultaneously.
Just to make 2 specific needles point at a specific letter painted on the board.
It sounds incredibly unwieldy.
Oh, I was economically doomed from the start.
I mean, to make this work across the British countryside, you need a minimum of 5 separate insulated copper wires strung from pole to pole just to send one letter at a time.
The infrastructure cost alone is staggering, let alone the maintenance of 5 fragile wires.
Terrifying to even think about.
They were essentially trying to force electricity to act like a human finger pointing at a letter. It's a totally analog mindset applied to a radically new medium.
But Morse was different.
Yeah. Morse, being an artist used to working with abstraction and symbolism, he collaborated with a skilled mechanic named Alfred Vail.
Right. Vail was crucial.
Very crucial. Together, they took a completely different philosophical approach. They embraced what we could call the single wire imperative.
The single wire imperative, okay? Meaning instead of adapting a heavy, expensive physical machine to mirror how we read or write,
They decided to abstract human language itself, to fit the simplest, cheapest possible physical medium.
one wire.
One single electrical circuit. It's either on or it's off.
Using high-intensity electromagnets developed by Joseph Henry and other brilliant scientists, they created this brutally simple receiver.
Right. A single burst of electricity would travel down the one wire, magnetize an iron core at the other end, pull down a metal lever called an armature, and make a mark on paper or a clicking sound.
Current flowing or current not flowing?
Exactly.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second because I want to challenge the technical definition here.
Sure, go for it.
If binary is strictly ones and zeros, like just on or off,
Right.
how is Morse code truly binary? I mean, it uses dots, dashes, and spaces of varying lengths. It feels like something else mathematically.
What's fascinating here is that you're hitting on a really important technical nuance. Mathematically speaking, you're right, Morse code is a ternary system.
Ternary, meaning 3.
Yeah, it has 3 distinct states. The short dot, the longer dash, and the pause or space between them. So it is highly dependent on timing.
Okay.
However, the philosophical and physical leap is absolutely identical to binary computing
How so?
because the underlying physical layer of the telegraph wire is purely binary. The circuit is either closed, allowing current to flow, which is a state of 1, or it is open, blocking current, which is a state of 0.
Oh, I see. So they are taking a purely binary physical state and just manipulating the dimension of time.
Exactly.
Like how long you hold that one state to create the ternary code.
That is the absolute genius of it. Morse and Vail proved that the infinite complexity of human language, like every philosophical treaty, every military command, every love letter, could be broken down into a series of discrete on-off electrical pulses.
Wow.
They proved that information is completely independent of its physical medium. The letter A is no longer a physical shape of ink drawn on paper.
It is a pattern of invisible energy. Short pulse, long pulse.
It's entirely abstract.
It really is the first widely adopted digital protocol. I mean, it's the direct ancestor to ASCII and the binary code running in our computers right now.
It really is.
But once you encode this information into electricity, you run straight into the brutal reality of physics.
Oh, yeah, the sheer tyranny of distance.
Right. We've got our single wire, we've got our abstract dots and dashes, but when you try to send that signal across a continent, you hit a massive physical barrier, attenuation.
Yeah, attenuation is a huge problem.
Yeah.
An electrical signal doesn't just travel forever with perfect clarity. As a pulse of electricity travels along a heavy copper or iron wire, it experiences resistance. The metal itself literally fights the flow of the current.
And it's not just resistance.
No. On top of that, you have capacitance and inductance, which is essentially energy leaking out of the wire into the surrounding air and ground.
So the signal gets weaker, it gets tired.
Very tight.
That sharp, crisp pulse of electricity representing a dot starts to flatten out into this muddy, weak, rolling wave.
Until it's just undetectable noise.
So for a direct, unassisted electrical circuit in the mid-19th century, how far could you actually go?
You might only get a legible, workable signal for maybe 20 or 30 miles before it just fades to nothing.
20 or 30 miles, which is a massive problem if you were trying to connect Washington, D.C. to New York, let alone build a network from New York to San Francisco.
It seemed impossible.
And we have to pause here and appreciate the sheer physical grit required to even attempt this. We aren't talking about launching a satellite.
No, not at all.
Building this network meant absolute armies of laborers, they called them linemen, going out into the untamed wilderness.
They were clear-cutting forests, treating massive wooden poles with highly toxic preservatives.
Digging holes by hand, and raising this arboreal avenue of communication across entire continents.
It was an infrastructure project that easily rivaled the construction of the railroads, but it was dedicated entirely to the flow of weightless, invisible information.
But all of that blood, sweat, and capital investment in poles and wires is completely useless if the signal dies after 30 miles.
Right. It's a useless wire if the message doesn't arrive.
So if I'm standing in a telegraph office in New York, and I want to send a pulse to Chicago, how do they keep that digital pulse alive across hundreds of miles of wilderness?
The solution was a mechanical invention by Samuel Morse in 1837, and it again relied heavily on Joseph Henry's electromagnet work.
Okay.
It is called the telegraphic relay, and it is arguably one of the most important hardware inventions in the history of global networking.
Okay, let's walk through how this relay actually functions in the physical world.
Okay, picture the telegraph line ending at a small wooden station after traveling its 30 miles.
Got it.
The electrical signal arriving at that station is incredibly weak. Just a dying breath of voltage. It is far too weak to power a heavy clicking machine for an operator to hear.
Okay, so it can't make the clack sound.
Right. But it's just strong enough to energize a very small, highly sensitive electromagnet inside the relay device.
Okay, so the faint signal magnetizes a tiny iron core.
And that weak magnetism is just barely strong enough to pull a tiny feather-light metal lever, the armature.
Okay.
But here's the brilliant trick. When that tiny lever moves, it doesn't make a mark on paper. It acts as a switch. It physically closes a completely new, separate, local electrical circuit.
A local circuit, sitting right there in the station that has its own fresh, powerful battery attached to it.
Yes. So that weak incoming signal from the east trips the tiny switch, the fresh local battery kicks in, and a brand new full-strength electrical pulse is sent down the next 30 miles of wire heading west.
Oh, wow. Okay, I need to visualize this with an analogy.
Go for it.
If I am standing on the edge of a massive canyon and I yell a message across it, my voice echoes. It gets distorted by the wind. It gets quiet.
Naturally.
If I use an analog amplifier, like setting up a giant microphone and speaker system on the other side, it just takes my distorted, muddy, wind-blown echo and makes that muddy distortion louder.
Right. It amplifies the noise along with the signal.
But this relay, it's like having a person standing in the middle of the canyon. They listen very carefully to my faint, dying voice. They understand the actual words I'm saying, and then they turn around, take a massive deep breath, and scream a brand new, perfect, full-volume version of my words to the next person down the line.
That analogy perfectly encapsulates the fundamental difference between analog and digital transmission. Yes. Analog amplification amplifies everything, the signal, plus all the accumulated static and noise. If you chain 10 analog amplifiers together over 1,000 miles, the original message is buried under a mountain of static.
But the telegraphic relay is fundamentally digital. It regenerates the signal.
Completely. It strips away all the accumulated noise from the wilderness. As long as the incoming pulse is just barely strong enough to trip that delicate switch, the relay doesn't care how muddy or flattened the wave has become.
It just outputs a pristine, mathematically perfect square pulse of electricity from the fresh battery.
It reshapes, retimes, and regenerates the data. If we connect this to the bigger picture, to the architecture of the modern internet, this is the exact same principle used in the regenerative repeaters spliced into the fiber optic cables resting on the ocean floor today.
Oh, wow.
It's exactly how the Ethernet switches work in your home office. The telegraph relay was the world's first digital amplifier.
So now, thanks to the relay, we can chain these 30-mile segments together indefinitely. We can leapfrog the signal from New York to Chicago and eventually from Chicago to San Francisco.
We have a continent-spanning network.
But as this physical network explodes in size, humanity hits a completely new systemic problem.
Traffic.
Yes. You've got thousands of wires, hundreds of branch stations, and millions of electrical clicks flying around the continent every day. How on earth do you route all of this chaotic traffic to the right destination without modern computers to sort it out?
You are entering the realm of network topology and the birth of early routing protocols.
Okay, break that down.
Well, because telegraph networks were incredibly expensive to build, they naturally form what we call a star or mesh topology.
Right.
You had major city hubs like New York or Chicago, with lines branching out to smaller regional towns.
Because it's physically impossible to have a dedicated single wire connecting every single person to every other person. You can't have a wire going directly from a farmhouse in Ohio to a specific bank in Boston.
It would blanket the sky in copper. It's impossible. So they had to invent a routing paradigm to navigate the mesh. This gave birth to the store and forward paradigm.
Store and forward.
Yes. If you wanted to send a message from Boston to that small town in Ohio, the message didn't travel on a single, continuous, unbroken wire.
Okay, how did it travel?
It was sent from Boston to a massive hub in New York. It was received by an operator there, written down on a piece of paper, literally buffered in physical space.
Buffered on paper.
And then a runner would carry that piece of paper across the room to another operator sitting at a different desk, who would then transmit it on the specific wire heading west to Chicago.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The human being was literally acting as the network router.
They were the vital nodes of the network, and this leads to a fascinating cognitive shift in the operators themselves.
The cognitive shift, yes. Tell us about how they actually interacted with the machines.
Yeah. Okay, so the very earliest systems, designed by Morse, used a physical register. It was a clockwork machine that pulled a strip of paper tape under a stylus, and the electromagnet would physically emboss the dots and dashes into the paper.
Right, so the operator would then pick up the paper and visually read the code.
Like reading Braille or ticker tape, exactly like that.
Okay.
But very quickly, the operators realized that the heavy mechanical register was slowing them down. They didn't need to look at the paper. They could just listen to the electromagnet working.
Because it made noise.
A lot of noise. When the current arrived and the electromagnet violently pulled the heavy armature down, it made a sharp, loud clack against the brass frame.
Clack.
And when the current stopped and the spring pulled the armature back to its resting position, it made a lighter, softer click.
So a clack followed quickly by a click is a dot. And a clack followed by a longer pause before the click is a dash.
You have it perfectly. It transformed from a visual language into an acoustic rhythm. And these telegraph operators became so incredibly skilled that they threw the paper tape machines away entirely.
They just listened.
They became pure acoustic decoders.
This is where the history just blows my mind. These operators are sitting in massive, noisy rooms, listening to a barrage of clacks and clicks, and they are basically acting as 19th century organic internet routers.
Completely organic.
They are mentally buffering the audio pulses in their short-term memory, translating them into English letters, forming words, and writing out the message by hand, often staying 3 or 4 words behind the incoming audio stream just to ensure they have the context right.
It is a stunning feat of human cognitive processing. They were human-in-the-loop processors operating at the speed of thought.
Wow.
And because the physical network was highly prone to errors like a lightning strike miles away, a fallen tree branch touching the wire, a fluctuating battery, the signals often arrived garbled.
Right, line noise.
Exactly. So to deal with this chaotic reality, these operators organically developed the very first communication protocols.
Like a set of standardized rules for how 2 machines, or in this case 2 humans, talk to each other over a noisy network.
Yes. Before an operator could send the actual telegram, they couldn't just start blasting beta down the wire. They had to execute a handshaking routine.
A handshake?
Yeah. They would tap out a specific call sign to wake up the receiving operator and then wait for an acknowledgement that the receiver was actually sitting at the desk, pen in hand, ready to copy.
That makes total sense.
Then they organically created standard structural forms for the message itself, establishing what a modern software engineer would immediately recognize as a data packet.
Okay, I love this. Walk us through a 19th century data packet. What were the components?
It started with a preamble, which identified the station of origin and the routing path it had taken.
Like an IP address path.
Very similar. Then came the metadata. This was crucial. It included a sequence number for the message and, most importantly, a check number, which was the total word count of the upcoming message.
Oh, so the receiver knows exactly how much data to expect before the message even begins.
Yes. Then came the payload, the actual text of the telegram, and finally an end-of-message signal.
That's incredible.
They laid the absolute groundwork for packet validation and error checking. If the receiving operator got to the end of the payload and their handwritten word count didn't match the metadata check number, they knew they had dropped a word due to line noise.
Because of the static.
Exactly. So they would immediately send a protocol command back down the line requesting a retransmission of the data.
It is literally the foundational logic of TCP/IP, the protocol that makes the internet work today. But it was being executed by guys in waistcoats and green eye shades listening to clicking pieces of brass.
Exactly.
But as these networks grew more ambitious and started crossing international borders, they ran into a massive standardization crisis, right?
A huge crisis. The first major clash was the shift from American Morse code to international Morse code.
Wait, they were different.
Oh, very different. The original American Morse, which was designed by Alfred Vail, was actually quite quirky. It included internal spaces within certain single letters.
We mean internal spaces.
For example, the letter O in American Morse wasn't 3 dashes. It was dot, space, dot.
That seems confusing.
On short, dry landlines across the United States, it was perfectly fine. The sharp clacks and clicks maintained their integrity. But as they started laying much longer lines, and particularly when they attempted to lay submarine cables underwater,
The ocean.
the physical properties of the environment changed the game completely.
The physical environment attacked the code itself. Historical accounts note that these submarine cables acted as massive electrical capacitors.
Yes, they did.
For the non-engineers among us, what does capacitance actually do to an electrical signal traveling under the ocean?
Think of a capacitor like a giant, invisible sponge for electricity. When you send a sharp, quick, perfectly square pulse of electricity into a long wire surrounded by miles of salt water, the insulation and the water interact.
The sponge soaks it up.
Exactly. The cable itself absorbs some of that electrical energy at the front of the pulse and then slowly releases it at the tail end of the pulse.
So it takes that crisp square wave and stretches it out.
It smears it. The sharp dot becomes a long, fading slope of voltage. And if you have a code like American Morse that relies on tiny, precise fractions of a second of silence, those internal spaces between dots to define a specific letter.
The capacitive smearing makes the code completely illegible.
Completely. The spaces literally disappear into the electrical distortion. The receiver just hears a continuous, muddy hum.
So the environment forced a software update.
That's a great way to put it. A conference in Europe was forced to standardize what became International Morse code, which deliberately eliminated all internal spaces within individual characters.
So no more dot space dot more.
Right. Every letter and number became a continuous rhythmic string of dots and dashes, designed specifically to survive the brutal capacitive distortion of the ocean floor.
Which brings us perfectly to the ultimate boss fight for the Telegraph. Conquering the oceans.
It was inevitable.
We've got the land networks working, we've updated the code to survive the water, but the physical act of spanning the Atlantic Ocean is a staggering story of hubris and engineering.
It really is. The Transatlantic Cable Project, led by the American entrepreneur Cyrus Westfield, was an audacious, almost mad undertaking.
Mad is the right word.
It took over a decade of failed attempts, millions of dollars lost, and cables snapping and vanishing into the 2-mile-deep abyss before they finally established a lasting connection in 1866.
I try to picture the logistics of this in the 1850s and 60s, and it just seems impossible. You need massive converted warships, like the HMS Agamemnon, carrying thousands of tons of copper wire.
Yeah, heavy, heavy loads.
And you can't just drop bare copper wire into the salt water. It was short out instantly against the earth. They needed to insulate thousands of miles of wire.
And this is where nature provided a highly specific technological savior, gutta percha.
Gutta percha, what is that?
It is a natural rubber-like sap harvested from trees in Southeast Asia.
Okay.
Unlike early forms of rubber, which would become brittle and crack in the freezing depths, gutta percha was thermoplastic. It could be molded around the copper wire, and in the crushing cold and immense pressure of the deep ocean, it remained incredibly tough.
So it didn't snap in the cold?
No, and it perfectly insulated the copper core from the corrosive salt water.
So after heartbreak, snapped cables, and financial ruin, they finally get this gutta percha-wrapped wire laid successfully in 1866.
Finally.
London can instantly talk to New York. The 2-week communication gap of a steamship crossing vanishes overnight. And this triggers an explosive economic phenomenon known as the network effect.
Yes. The network effect dictates that the value of a telecommunications network increases exponentially, not linearly, with every new node added to it.
Explain that a bit more.
Well, if you own the only telegraph machine in the world, it is completely useless.
Right. Who you're going to talk to.
Exactly. If you connect two major cities, it's highly valuable. But if you connect the entire eastern seaboard to the financial capitals of Europe, the network becomes indispensable to human civilization.
And because laying this physical infrastructure, chopping down forests, sailing across oceans, buying tons of copper, is so insanely capital intensive, the industry naturally trends toward massive consolidation.
The barrier to entry was astronomically high, so we see the rapid birth of the telecommunications monopoly.
Like Western Union.
Exactly. In the United States, this took the form of Western Union, which ruthlessly bought up or crushed smaller regional networks.
But then what about in Europe?
In Europe, it took the form of state-controlled entities, the Postal, Telegraph, and Telephone Administrations, or PTTs. These massive organizations realized a fundamental truth of the modern world.
Which is?
Whoever controls the physical transmission lines, the backbone of the network controls the flow of commerce, the dissemination of news, and the levers of state power.
But listener, consider the sheer madness of this situation for a moment. You have the world's most sensitive data flowing across this network. Military orders for empires, state secrets, massive global financial transfers.
All of it.
And you are trusting all of that to a single, fragile, tree sap-wrapped wire sitting in the mud at the bottom of the ocean waiting for an anchor to snag it. Weren't the governments of the world terrified of relying on a single point of failure?
This raises an important question that absolutely defines the geopolitical struggles of the internet today, the battle between centralization and decentralization.
Okay, connect those for us.
Physically, the telegraph network was sprawling and highly decentralized across multiple continents. But administratively and at key physical choke points like the landing stations where those submarine cables came out of the ocean, the network was dangerously centralized.
It was an hourglass shape.
Yeah.
All that data had to squeeze through a few specific buildings on the coast.
And incredibly vulnerable because of it. Messages passing between continents inevitably had to pass through foreign nodes. This meant imperial powers could and did monitor global traffic.
Wow.
The historical record shows that the age of wiretapping, state surveillance, and cyber vulnerabilities was born the very day the first submarine cable was spliced.
Really?
Oh, yeah. If a telegram from a rival nation routed through a British landing station in Cornwall, the British government could theoretically and practically intercept, read, and copy it.
Just like modern packet sniffing.
Exactly. The exact same conflicts we see today over data sovereignty, state surveillance, and monopoly control over the internet's submarine backbone are just echoes of the 1870s.
Which perfectly sets up the next massive engineering hurdle. These monopolies, like Western Union, have spent absolute fortunes laying these ocean cables and transcontinental lines.
Huge fortunes.
And they're capitalist to their core. They look at the single copper wire running between New York and Chicago and they say, how do we squeeze more profit out of this physical asset?
They were facing the economic problem of line economy. Think about it. If a highly skilled human operator can only tap out about 40 words a minute, and the expensive physical wire is only being used for those specific intermittent electrical bursts.
There is a vast amount of unused physical capacity.
Exactly. Bandwidth, essentially, sitting idle on that copper line. The holy grail for these companies was multiplexing.
Multiplexing, the ability to send multiple independent messages over the exact same physical wire at the exact same time.
Right.
Which, on its face, sounds like magic. If I have a single-lane highway and it's full of cars, the only way to get more traffic through is to spend billions to pave a new lane.
That's the normal logic, yeah.
Yeah. But the telegraph engineers basically figured out how to let 4 cars drive in the exact same physical single lane at the same time without crashing into each other. How do they actually achieve that?
The first major conceptual breakthrough happened in 1853 with an Austrian inventor named Julius Wilhelm Gintel. And it was later perfected by an American, Joseph Stearns.
Okay, what did they do?
They invented what was called duplex telegraphy. This allowed 2 messages to be sent simultaneously in opposite directions on one wire.
Okay, let's slow down here. I have an electrical pulse going east and an electrical pulse going west on the exact same copper wire at the same time. Why don't the voltages just collide and scramble the signal into gibberish?
Yeah, why don't they crash? The solution was a brilliant piece of electrical engineering involving differential windings on the electromagnet in the receiver.
Differential windings. Okay, I need an analogy.
To use your analogy, think of it like the technology inside modern noise-canceling headphones.
Okay, noise-canceling headphones listen to the ambient noise and generate an exact inverse sound wave to cancel it out, leaving silence.
Exactly the same principle, but with electricity. Stearns used an artificial line, a setup of resistors and capacitors, to perfectly mimic the electrical properties of the long wire stretching across the country.
Okay.
So when the operator in New York pressed his key, the current split in half. Half went out to Chicago and half went into the artificial line.
Oh, I see.
Inside the New York receiver, these two identical currents flowed in opposite directions through the electromagnet's coils. Their magnetic fields perfectly canceled each other out.
Meaning the New York receiver was completely blind to its own outgoing signal. It didn't click when the New York operator pressed the key.
Yes, but because it was in a state of perfect magnetic balance regarding its own signal, it remained completely sensitive to any incoming signal arriving from Chicago.
That is mind-blowing. Both sides did this, meaning they could talk over each other continuously without their own machines interfering.
That is incredibly elegant, right? But the capitalists weren't satisfied with just two messages. Enter Thomas Edison in 1874.
Of course, Edison enters the chat.
Naturally. He takes this duplex concept and scales it up to invent the quadruplex telegraph. 4 messages simultaneously on one wire, 2 going east, 2 going west.
4 cars in one lane. So if the duplex solved the problem of signals crashing head-on, how did Edison manage to have 2 signals traveling in the same direction without interfering with each other?
Edison's genius was realizing he could manipulate 2 entirely different physical properties of the electrical current simultaneously.
What properties?
One set of transmitters and receivers communicated by changing the polarity of the current, meaning they were constantly flipping the direction the electricity was flowing, positive to negative.
So one machine only cares about the direction of the flow.
Right. And the other set of machines communicated by changing the amplitude, or the sheer brute strength of the voltage, regardless of which direction it was flowing.
Oh, I see. So the polarity receiver ignores how strong the current is. It only listens for the flips in direction. And the amplitude receiver ignores the flips. It only listens for spikes in power.
You've got it perfectly.
They are operating in the exact same wire, but they're existing on completely different physical logic planes.
Exactly. But the quest for bandwidth didn't stop there. Innovators like Alexander Graham Bell and Elisha Gray looked at Edison's quadruplex and wanted to push multiplexing even further.
Like dozens of messages.
Yeah, into the dozens, with something called acoustic or harmonic telegraphy.
And this is where the history of the telegraph directly collides with the birth of modern broadband. Bell and Gray wanted to send multiple signals down the wire by modulating the electrical pulses at different acoustic frequencies.
Think of it like a symphony of electrical notes. They used a series of tuned, vibrating steel reeds.
Reeds, like in a musical instrument.
Yeah. The transmitting operator would tap a key that vibrated a reed tuned to, say, 400 hertz, which is roughly the musical note G. This sent a 400 hertz electrical wave down the wire.
Okay, so a G note goes down the wire.
At the receiving end in another city, there was a bank of reeds. But only the specific reed tuned precisely to 400 hertz would vibrate in sympathy. It would physically ignore all other frequencies on the line.
So you'd have an operator tapping out a message on the A note, another on the C note, another on the G note, all throwing their signals into the same wire at the same time.
And the receiving reeds act as physical filters, only picking up their specific assigned tune.
Wow. Yes. Now, the harmonic telegraph was eventually sidelined for a very famous reason, wasn't it?
Yeah. While playing with these vibrating reeds, Bell realized that if a wire could carry multiple complex frequencies, it could just transmit the most complex frequency of all the human voice directly.
He pivoted and invented the telephone.
He did. But the concept of harmonic multiplexing didn't die. Acoustic telegraphy is the direct conceptual ancestor of frequency division multiplexing, or FDM.
And FDM is the foundational technology of how we get broadband internet to our homes today, right?
It is the absolute bedrock. Today, we don't use acoustic tones vibrating steel reeds. We use the electromagnetic spectrum of light. Modern fiber optic cables spanning the globe carry terabits of data per second using wavelength division multiplexing.
Wavelength division multiplexing.
Yeah. They send dozens of different streams of digital data on separate wavelengths, essentially, separate colors of laser light down a single microscopic glass strand.
So the red laser ignores the blue laser, just like the A note read ignored the G note read.
Precisely the same physics, just operating at the speed of light rather than the speed of sound. The entire architecture of the modern optical internet traces its lineage directly back to those inventors tinkering with vibrating steel reeds, trying to squeeze a few more telegrams onto a copper wire.
The direct lineage of the technology is staggering. But let's step out of the engineering lab for a moment.
Okay, let's step out.
We've established how the physical hardware work, how the humans routed the data, and how the engineers multiplexed the bandwidth. Now let's look at the human impact.
Oh, the human impact is massive.
We've built this massive, high-speed, globe-spanning nervous system. How did the sheer velocity of this infrastructure actually alter human behavior, society, and the way we experience reality?
Well, the telegraph completely reorganized the temporal reality of the human race. And the clearest place to see this shift is in the news.
The news cycle.
Before the 1840s, news was inherently retrospective. It was history by the time you read it.
Right. If a major battle happened in Europe or a king died, Americans wouldn't know about it until a ship crossed the Atlantic weeks or months later.
Exactly. The telegraph birthed the concept of real-time news. It invented the modern news cycle.
But because utilizing this real-time network was incredibly expensive, it was charged by the word, and the mile local newspapers couldn't afford to have their own dedicated reporters wiring thousands of words across the country.
No, they had to pool their resources.
That economic pressure is the direct origin of the major wire services.
Yes. The Associated Press was founded in 1846, and Reuters in London in 1851, specifically to share the exorbitant costs of transmitting news over the telegraph wires among a syndicate of papers.
So what does this all mean? The billing model, paying per word, fundamentally rewired the English language.
It really did. I find this fascinating. The billing model of a technology changed how humans actually write.
Walk us through that evolution.
If you read 19th century journalism before the telegraph, it is highly verbose, literary, and flowery.
Very Dickensian.
Right. The writer acts like a novelist, slowly building context, setting the scene, and delaying the main point until the final paragraph for dramatic effect.
But when every single syllable costs money, and more importantly, when the physical connection might drop at any second due to a thunderstorm in Ohio, you cannot afford flowery prose.
You have to get straight to the facts immediately. Thus, the telegraph forced the invention of the inverted pyramid style of journalism that is still taught today.
The inverted pyramid, where you put the most crucial information first.
The who, what, when, where, and why in the very first sentence. Then you provide supporting details in descending order of importance.
So if the telegraph line drops halfway through transmission, or the editor simply runs out of budget to pay for the wire time, the reader still gets the core facts of the story.
Exactly. A physical network limitation literally rewired human syntax.
And it reminds me exactly of how we consume prioritized digital feeds today. Think about Twitter in its early days.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
A tweet originally had a strict 140-character limit, not because of a design choice, but because it was built on top of the SMS cellular protocol limits.
Right, it was a hardware limit.
That physical limitation forced a specific, hyper-condensed, often punchy style of communication that changed modern political and social discourse. The inverted pyramid of the 1850s is the 19th century version of the timeline feed.
You're hitting on a recurring theme here. The medium dictates the message. And while the telegraph changed how we read the news, the financial revolution it triggered was perhaps even more profound.
The financial markets.
The telegraph violently erased geographic arbitrage.
Okay, explain geographic arbitrage in the context of the 1800s.
Before the telegraph, global markets were isolated islands of information. If the price of cotton plummeted in London due to a surplus, it might take 2 weeks for a steamship to carry that news to New York.
Right.
A savvy, well-connected trader in New York who got that news from a fast ship before the general public could make an absolute fortune. They could buy or sell in the New York market based on the future reality they knew was coming.
Information asymmetry was highly profitable because the speed of information was the speed of a boat.
But once the transatlantic cable was active, stock prices and commodity valuations in London and New York synchronized within minutes. The world was suddenly flattened into the first integrated, real-time global financial system. A panic in London caused a panic on Wall Street the very same afternoon. It birthed the high-stress, real-time trading floors we recognize today.
But to make this massive logistical and financial machine function smoothly, especially the railroads that literally ran parallel to the telegraph lines, they had to solve a massive existential problem.
Regarding how humans experience time itself.
Yes, the synchronization of time is perhaps the telegraph's most subtle but profound societal legacy. Before the network, every single town on Earth operated on local sun time.
Noon was simply the moment when the sun was highest in the local sky.
Because the Earth rotates, noon in Boston occurs a few minutes before noon in New York, which is a few minutes before noon in Philadelphia.
Which sounds quaint until you try to run a high-speed train network across those towns.
Let's explore the actual mechanical friction here. Why did local sun time cause such a nightmare?
It caused literal, fatal train crashes.
Yeah.
Imagine a train leaving Boston based on Boston time, heading on a single track toward a train that left New York based on New York time. The conductors have pocket watches set to different realities. The dispatchers trying to coordinate them via telegraph are dealing with dozens of conflicting local times. It was logistical chaos.
The high-speed network of the railroad and the instant communication of the telegraph demanded a shared, absolute temporal reality. They needed everyone to agree on what now meant.
Exactly. So, driven largely by the railroad and telegraph companies, the world abolished local sun time and forced the creation of standardized time zones.
Carving the planet up.
The entire planet was carved into strict bands, synchronized to a single master clock. It's worth noting, this was not popular.
Really? People fought it.
Oh yeah, many local towns fiercely resisted railroad time, seeing it as corporate overreach dictating the sun. But the efficiency of the network won out.
The network demanded synchronization. And you made a brilliant note in our preparation for this deep dive that this 19th century standardization prefigures one of the most critical, invisible protocols running the internet today.
It's a direct parallel. The telegraph shifted humanity from the era of the printing press, which was about the reproduction of static content, to the era of the network, which is about the creation of real-time connections.
Right.
And a global network of active connections requires absolute microscopic synchronization. Just as the telegraph required standardized time zones to prevent train crashes, the modern internet requires protocols like NTP, the Network Time Protocol.
New York Time Protocol.
NTP constantly synchronizes the clocks of billions of servers, routers, and smartphones down to the millisecond. Without that precise, shared temporal reality, secure encrypted connections would fail, banking database transactions would process out of order, and the digital economy would collapse.
We've gone from changing how journalists write to synchronizing global markets to literally forcing the human race onto a standardized clock.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. But as we move toward the culmination of this deep dive, we discover that the telegraph's ultimate world-changing legacy wasn't in the wires or the society it shaped.
No, it was hiding quietly in the physical, clicking brass switches of the relays themselves.
We've talked about how the telegraph network operated, but to understand its ultimate legacy, we have to look at how the physical infrastructure of the telegraph literally gave birth to the brain of the modern computer.
Yes.
Now, if you're listening to this and wondering why we are suddenly about to talk about abstract algebra when we're just talking about oceanic cables and train crashes, stick with us, because this is the exact specific moment the telegraph wire evolves into a computer chip.
To connect those dots, we have to look at two seemingly unrelated historical events, separated by 80 years.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first takes place in 1854, when a brilliant British mathematician named George Boole publishes a book introducing a radically new system of algebra. It became known as Boolean algebra.
And unlike the algebra we learn in high school that deals with continuous numbers and graphs, Boolean algebra is based entirely on binary states. True and false. Ones and zeros.
Yes. Boole was trying to mathematically model human thought. His algebra featured specific logical operators, A and D or R and not T.
And D or not D.
It was a stunning philosophical construct, formalizing logical deductions into strict algebraic equations. But for over 80 years, it was viewed mostly as abstract math.
It sat on dusty shelves in university libraries. It had no obvious practical engineering application in the physical world. It was just a theory of logic.
Until a grad student at MIT gets his hands on it in the 1930s.
Enter Claude Shannon.
In 1937, Shannon, who is just 21 years old at the time, publishes his master's thesis, and it is widely considered one of the most important foundational academic papers of the 20th century.
What was he studying?
Shannon was studying the incredibly complex electromechanical relay circuits that were being used to route telegraphs and early automated telephone
The
exchanges.
same relays we talked about earlier, the
Yeah.
tiny switches that click open and close to regenerate the signal.
The very same physical mechanisms. By the 1930s, designing these routing networks had become incredibly difficult. Engineers basically used intuition and trial and error to wire thousands of clicking switches together to route a call.
Just guessing, basically.
Pretty much. But Shannon, who had studied Boole's obscure algebra, had a profound lightning bolt realization. He looked at the physical behavior of these brass telegraph switches, and he realized they operated on the exact same logic as Boole's abstract math.
Wait, so a mathematician in 1854 invents a system of logic, and it sits on a shelf for 80 years until a grad student looks at a telegraph switch and realizes the physical machine is already doing the math.
Yes. Let's reason through this together so everyone can see what Shannon saw. A telegraph switch has two physical states. It is either closed, allowing the electricity to flow through it, or it is open, blocking the electricity.
Right. Closed represents true, or the number 1. Open represents false, or the number 0. That's the basic binary state. Now, how does a physical switch do algebra?
Let's map Boole's operators onto the wire. Imagine you wire two telegraph switches together in a row, one right after the other on the same wire. This is called wiring them in series.
Okay, in series.
For the electrical current to flow all the way through the circuit and light a bulb at the end, switch A must be closed and switch B must be closed. If either one of them is open, the current stops.
It requires both conditions to be true. That physical arrangement of wire is literally the Boolean AND operator.
Exactly. Let's take it a step further. Now wire those two switches in parallel, side by side, where the wire splits into two paths and then rejoins.
Okay, so the electricity has a choice.
Right. The electricity can take either path. The current will flow to the bulb if switch A is closed or if switch B is closed.
That physical arrangement is the Boolean or OR operator.
By mathematically mapping this abstract 19th century algebra onto the physical circuitry of 19th century telegraph relays, Shannon proved a world-altering concept. Switches could perform actual mathematical calculations.
Logic was no longer just a philosophical exercise. By arranging enough relays in the right complex patterns of ANDs, ORs, and NOTs, you can build a physical circuit that adds binary numbers together.
You can build a circuit that compares two numbers. You can build a circuit that stores data in physical memory.
Logic and computation escaped the human mind. They became physical processes, executed at lightning speed by electrical currents moving through switches.
This realization is the absolute bedrock foundation of the digital age. Every single logic gate inside every silicon microprocessor powering the internet, your smartphone, and the satellites in orbit right now is fundamentally just a miniaturized, microscopic, solid-state version of the telegraph relay executing Boolean logic.
That is just incredible.
The telegraph wire didn't just connect the world physically, its internal clicking mechanics provided the exact mathematical and engineering blueprint for the computer brain.
Okay, let's take a breath and look back at the incredible journey we've just taken. We started with a painter on a wooden packet ship, Samuel Morse, looking at a twitching compass needle and deciding to abstract the infinite complexity of human language into simple, binary pulses of energy.
It's quite a journey.
We saw armies of laborers clear-cutting forests to string heavy copper wire, defeating the physical tyranny of distance, aided by the magical regenerating power of the relay. We watched highly skilled human operators act as organic routers, buffering data in their minds and organically inventing the first packet-switching protocols.
We witnessed the audacious conquering of the ocean floor with tree sap and iron, and the rapid birth of massive centralized monopolies that struggled with the exact same cyber vulnerabilities, wiretapping, and data sovereignty issues we face today.
We saw engineers brilliantly manipulate polarity and acoustic frequencies to squeeze multiple signals down a single wire, directly prefiguring modern fiber optics.
We explored how a simple billing model forced journalists to invent the inverted pyramid.
How the speed of the wire synchronized global finance and erased arbitrage, and how the network literally forced the scattered towns of the world onto a single standardized clock.
And finally, we saw how the physical switches routing these mundane messages brought abstract 19th century mathematics to life, birthing binary computing.
As we said at the beginning, the telegraph was the internet. It was just running in a lower gear.
Exactly.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to mull over. We've talked extensively about the hardware, the math, and the economics, But there was a profound, permanent psychological shift that occurred in the human species as well.
The psychological shift.
Before the telegraph, waiting weeks or even months for news from a loved one or a business partner across the ocean was simply the normal human condition. It was expected. Silence was the baseline.
But the telegraph fundamentally conditioned the human mind to expect real-time connection.
And in doing so, it birthed a modern culture of anxiety. It created a world where the absence of an immediate signal is instantly interpreted as a system failure or a crisis.
Right, because if you don't hear back immediately, something must be wrong.
Think about the opening of our deep dives today. Imagine the visceral spike of panic and isolation you feel right now when your smartphone loses Wi-Fi or cellular service for even an hour.
Or even 5 minutes.
Right. That creeping anxiety, that feeling of being suddenly severed from the global nervous system. You aren't the first generation to feel that. That psychological rewiring happened in the 19th century, in the bustling, clicking, high-stress rooms of the telegraph office.
The bandwidth of human awareness was permanently stretched by the velocity of the electric wire. And we can never go back to the silence.
So the next time you find yourself staring at a spinning, loading icon on your phone, feeling your blood pressure rise because a web page is taking 3 extra seconds to load, just remember, you are participating in a culture of immediacy that began with a twitching compass needle and a copper wire wrapped in tree sap. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the telegraphic revolution. Keep questioning the invisible infrastructure around you, and we'll see you next time.